All right, let's talk about the amazing political philosophy of G.W.8.F. Hegel, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. And you should pronounce it that way, given this political philosophy. I'll just start you with a couple quotes for the hell of it. The state, in and by itself, is the ethical whole, the actualization of freedom. It's the ethical whole. The state is the actualization of freedom. And it is an absolute end of reason that freedom should be actual. It is an absolute end of reason that freedom should be actual. We could work through this conception of freedom. Now the Western conception of freedom as obedience, as capitulation, reaches its zenith. The grossest and most absurd moment in Western intellectual history. The state is mind on earth and consciously realizing itself there. In nature, on the other hand, mind actualizes itself only as its own other, as mind asleep. Only when it is present in consciousness, when it knows itself as a really existent object, it is the state. And considering freedom, the starting point must not be individuality, the single self-consciousness, but only the essence of self-consciousness, for whether man knows it or not, this essence is externally realized as a self-subsistent power in which single individuals are only moments. The march of God in the world, that is what the state is. We should desire to have in the state nothing except what is an expression of rationality. The state is the world which mind has made for itself. Its march, therefore, is on lines that are fixed and absolute. How often we talk of the wisdom of God in nature, but we are not to assume for that reason that the physical world of nature is a loftier thing than the world of mind. As high as mind stands above nature, so high does the state stand above physical life. Man must therefore venerate the state as a secular deity and observe that if it is difficult to comprehend nature, if science is difficult, it is infinitely harder to understand the state. All right, so what we've hit here is the cult of the state, literal divination of the state. You might recall that Hobbes described the state as a mortal god, portrayed the state as a deity, kind of, but Hegel goes all the way. The march of God in history. The state is an individual, it's a mind. Right? Well, what we have here, though, so in relation to Rousseau, like I say, what I think happens in, this whole history in the modern period, but definitely Rousseau through the 19th century and the 20th, is total intensification of collective identities and questions about them, and questions about which are primary, and an obsession with them, and a treatment of them, by and large, in Hegel, this is greater than anywhere else, as individuals, as minds, as personalities, collective individuals, as literally individual minds, demigods or gods. So I guess what I left with Rousseau is he leaves that open, what that is, the general will. Although he's moving toward nationalism, I think, basically. The general will is the will of a people. But, the 19th century did all kinds of stuff. Said all kinds of collective consciousnesses were fundamental races, classes, nations, and went to slaughtering on all those grounds. Now, in Hegel, the collective agent, at its most extreme version, like a real person, a real giant person, is the nation state. Okay, so he's really clear where I think Rousseau is somewhat obscure, or very obscure every time around. I mean, Hegel's unbelievably obscure, obviously, but he's clear on this, that what he's talking about is nation states. Um, and he's a nation state absolutist, and he thinks they're divine agents of the collective will, the collective personality that is God. Of course, history for Hegel, these are fundamental thoughts, insane as they are. History for Hegel is the working out or working to self-consciousness of God. And nation states are absolutely essential. So a nation state, like, okay, is a people, whatever the fuck that is, okay, common language, ethnicity, territory, perhaps, now embodied in a state power that combines all their wills into a single will. The will of the Kurdish people, or, well, he definitely has in mind the Prussians, okay, the German peoples, who he thinks now have the destiny of bringing about all human history. It was the Romans before, now it's the Germans. So German nation statehood is Hegel's goal, and he regards that as God. All right. All right. So let's. One thing just to mention: the nation state is certainly the most warlike organization that human beings have ever invented, and Hegel's into it. Hegel thinks war is essential to nation states, just as individuality is. It's essential to their individuality as persons or gods, to oppose the others, and that it has a salutary effect on the whole nation when it goes to war. That's our little Hegel. Intellectually, you don't get to the world wars without Hegel, man. And he's basically sitting there under all these collectivist visions, right? He's sitting there under Marx. He's sitting there under... I think he's very naturally next to fascism. Right? Really? All right. All right. Let's talk. I'm going to just try some quotes here and see what happens. This is his. I'm talking about Hegel's book, The Philosophy of Right. I have T.M. Knox's old translation of it. Those were passages that he regards as additions that he removed from the text, but then published in sort of an appendix. Some of the most problematic things, but I don't think that's what Hegel did. Hegel had them right in there. As he introduces, in the Philosophy of Right, the section on the state is the culmination, and it's by far the longest. And like I say, the cult of the state, of the total state, the absolute state, has never reached such a pitch of ecstasy, nor such a pitch of ridiculousness. It's fucking insane, dude. Like, it sounds as insane as it is. Like, I'm surprised that, well, one shouldn't be surprised at the reception of totalitarians in Western political philosophy. Like, everyone wants it, everyone loves it. That's my opinion. Right? And everyone denies it too. Okay? Like, Hegel's not a totalitarian. Like, fuck. Right? What are you reading, man? Same with Plato. Same with Rousseau. Although I'm going to admit, with Rousseau, it's kind of obscure in a way because he's such a mess. But in Hegel, there ain't no obscurity to it. He's obscure, but he's a totalitarian in your face, like slapping you down all day. It's hard to miss. The state as freedom, he says early on, in giving an outline of the book that's going to come. Freedom universal and objective, even in the free self-subsistence of the particular will. The actual and organic mind of a single nation reveals and actualizes itself through the interrelation of the particular national minds until, in the process of world history, it reveals and actualizes itself as the universal world mind whose right is supreme. All right, and that's the thought he develops in the last part of the philosophy of right. He portrays all the national minds, the nation states, the collective personalities of nations, as it captured in their states, as sitting around the throne, like it's a Raphael painting or something, or Christ enthroned, or sitting around the throne of world history as a whole, which they are preparing to vacate and become. Okay, but this is essential. Like right now, the point is to strengthen the nation state to the extreme and to work through all its wars, because that's how we'll get to the next phase of world history, in which a whole world mind is one, which I would assume is a world state. Lots of people love this vision. It's kind of a Habermas vision. It's Marx's vision. This idea of, I mean, not exactly, but the millennial flavor of it. I mean, try to imagine what you'd have to do to give good reasons to think that the government of Prussia and the government of France and the government of the United States and stuff are world historical demigods who are preparing the way for the ecstasy at the end of history through all their violence and repression. All of Europe went, well, now we know what's up, or now we have to work through this anyway, like we're Marx or something. Okay. All right. Sorry to be slow. I guess I'm going to take it a little at random, just to give you some sort of aspects of Hegel's totalitarianism. I think if you don't find what I've said so far just repulsive, you're not the right kind of person, okay? All right. In its character as a universal family, civil society has the right and duty of superintending and influencing education, inasmuch as education bears upon a child's capacity to become a member of society. Society's right here is paramount over the arbitrary and contingent preferences of parents, particularly in cases where education is to be completed not by the parents but by others. To the same end, society must provide public education. Okay, so this is, and it's very Plato. But what I wanted to emphasize is like some of the totalitarian moments. And so this is one, and it's one in common with Plato. The state will educate your children, probably remove them from your care. You're not. The state has as a job the forming of the consciousness of each person within the state. That's a totalitarian thing, if you ask me. Though public education sounds okay, right? Like literacy is good, but it's your Prussian patriotism. Public social conditions. I mean, okay, that was 239. These are all numbered paragraphs. That was 239. Public social conditions are, on the contrary, to be regarded as all the more perfect the less is left for an individual to do by himself as his private inclination directs. Public social conditions are more perfect as there is less for an individual to do by himself and as his private inclination directs. So it just says like there must be total command of your every gesture. Okay. It's kind of amazing that this comes in the early 19th century, which, for example, in the U.S. is the golden period of individualism. Boy, because this is the golden period of collectivism. The state is the actuality of concrete freedom. The state is a monopoly of coercion, dude. The state is a monopoly of violence and force and coercion. And the actuality of concrete freedom, that's what Hegel means by freedom. But concrete freedom consists in this: that personal individuality and its particular interests not only achieve their complete development and gain explicit recognition for their right, but for one thing, they also pass over of their own accord into the interest of the universal. And for another thing, they know and will the universal. They even recognize it as their own substantive mind. Like, you recognize the state as your own mind. Again, this is the idea of like becoming the lawgiver of yourself, and then you're perfectly free. When the state's doing all your thinking for you and all your deciding. The result is that the universal does not prevail or achieve completion except along with the particular interests and through the cooperation of particular knowing and willing. The principle of modern states has prodigious strength and depth because it allows the principle of subjectivity to progress to its culmination in the extreme of self-subsistent personal particularity, and yet at the same point to bring it back to the substantive unity and so maintain this unity in the principle of subjectivity itself. Okay, well, that's a bunch of Hegel hooey, a bunch of Hegel jargon. But I think you can feel the undertow, the totalitarian undertow. The organic unity, this is 299, paragraph 299, or section 299. The organic unity of the powers of the state implies that it is one single mind, which both firmly establishes the universal and also brings it into its determinate actuality and carries it out. The state is a single mind, bringing the universal into a determinate actuality. Since, this is 317, since in considering such opinion, we have to do with the consciousness of an insight and conviction peculiarly one's own, I'm not going to contextualize, yes, the more peculiarly one's own an opinion may be, the worse its content is. Like the extreme anti-individualism, and this is what Marx was really feeling in a way. The more peculiarly your ideas are, the worse their content is. The opposite of Emerson, let's say. Because the bad is that which is wholly private and personal in its content. The rational, on the other hand, is the absolutely universal, while it is on particularity, it is on peculiarity that opining prides itself. Okay. The good is the individual, and the good is the collective, and the evil is the individual. So if you're having your own thoughts at all, insofar as you are, that's evil. Definitely insofar as they contrast to the collective thought prescribed to you by the state in the education system or whatever. Freedom of public communication. Okay, he just rejects freedom of press, freedom of communication. He pays some wacky lip service to it, but whatever. In fact, this negative relation of the state to itself, very Hegel or Heidegger later on, is that moment in the state which is most supremely its own, the state's actual infinity as the ideality of everything finite within it. It is the moment wherein the substance of the state, its absolute power against everything individual in particular, its absolute power against everything individual in particular, against life, property, and their rights, even against societies and associations, makes the nullity of these finite things an accomplished fact and brings it home to consciousness. So that's just a flat statement of totalitarianism, although nothing's flat in Hegel, right? Because you have to wade through the endless jargon. The state's absolute power against everything, individual and particular, against life, property, rights, societies and associations, anything finite, because the state is an infinite mind. This destiny, whereby the rights and interests of individuals are established as a passing phase, the rights and interests of individuals are established as a passing phase, is at the same time the positive moment, the positing of their absolute, not their contingent and unstable individuality. So the moment where we're absorbed totally into the collective state is the positive moment. This relation and the recognition of it is therefore the individual's substantive duty, the duty to maintain this substantive individuality, i.e., the independence and sovereignty of the state, at the risk and sacrifice of property and life, as well as of opinion and everything else naturally comprised in the compass of life. Everything for the state, only for the state. Oh my God. I keep wanting to say this is the worst political philosophy I've ever read. This is the worst political philosophy that could ever exist. Because A, the most evil, B, the most ridiculous. Right? But there's a lot of competitors in the Western tradition, dude. Fundamental things, right? The nation state is mind in its substantive rationality and immediate actuality, and is therefore the absolute power on the earth. A nation does not begin by being a state. The transition from a family, a horde, a clan, a multitude, to the political condition is the realization of the idea in the form of the nation. 349, it says. Without this form, a nation as an ethical substance, which is what it is implicitly, lacks the objectivity of possessing in its own eyes and the eyes of others a universal and universally valid embodiment in laws. So, you can have a people, you can have a multitude, to form them up into a single personality, an agent of history driving forward to godly self-consciousness. You must coalesce your nation into a state. So this is the most explicit sort of nation state concept and cult is very clearly expressed in Hegel. And all the wars of these European nation states are anticipated and approved. Right? The concrete ideas, the minds of the nation, have their truth and their destiny in the concrete idea, which is absolute universality, the world mind. Around its throne, they stand as the executors of its actualization, the nation states, around the throne of the world mind, and as signs and ornaments of its grandeur. As mind, it is nothing but its active movement toward absolute knowledge itself, and therefore towards freeing its consciousness from the form of natural immediacy, and so coming to itself. Therefore, the principles of the formations of the self-consciousness in the course of its liberation, the world historical realms, are 4 in number. Therefore, the Oriental, the Greek, the Roman, and the German. I forget now which German monarch he's dealing with. He's a monarchist too, and in a very Hobbes vein that was like, the monarch is literally all of us in a single personality. All right. So I guess I'll kind of leave it there, but the cosmic idea of the nation state as gods, agents, and the nation state as an agent that should absorb, incorporate, and annihilate every individual consciousness and opinion. This is totalitarianism, modern totalitarianism, in its first explicit formulation. Okay, this is what Nazism and communism have in common. I mean, this is one way to put it. Roots in Hegel, dude. Okay? And collective consciousnesses. We should really talk about the implications of that. I mean, first of all, like, I don't want to just go for simple individualism. Like, there is no such thing as collective consciousness. But we've got to be a lot more circumspect about these things than someone like Hegel or someone like Rousseau, who's just uncritically throwing around collective consciousness in order to achieve political goals of keeping everyone subservient to the Prussian Empire or something. You know, what the fuck? All right. I shouldn't laugh because this is the intellectual center of the nightmare of all the wars and genocides, the racisms, the most brutal moments in colonialism, the most insane justifications for the most annihilating violence. They start here. Hegel loves war too. He rags on, maybe I should find this, but I mean, he specifically rags on Kant for having endorsed perpetual peace because he loves war. That's our Hegel. And we're heading into, you know, moments in Nietzsche, moments in Heidegger, moments in Hitler, moments in Marx, moments in Lenin, moments in Mao. Western political philosophy of the 19th century.